Hey guys, Quinn here. Hope you're all doing pretty well. Been looking at scopes for my 6.5 and I've got a couple in my hand that are similar enough that they're worth comparing, but there are some subtle differences based on how they were made, which I will bring up. We've got the Burris Signature HD. This is second down the line of Burris scopes behind the Veracity. And then we also have the Meopta Optika6, which is their, it's not like the Meo Star, it's the new Meo Pro. I wouldn't call it entry level, but it is not their flagship model either. So both of these are positioned kind of similarly in their respective product lines. The Burris retails for about $916, I think, $816, and the Meopta is somewhere around $900, depending on what you get. One big difference between these two is that the Burris is set up to be a 5 to 25, and this Meopta is set up to be a 3 to 18. So some of the comparisons aren't exactly apples to apples, but they are similar enough that I think there are some meaningful comparisons that can be made. The glass on both of these is clear. I would give the slight edge for clarity in terms of contrast and resolution to the Meopta. On 15x ranging target 500 yards, it was Tyvek house wrap. I was able to easily resolve the differences in the actual letters with the Meopta, and it was a little bit more blobby with the Burris. Also, looking at a lavender plant at about 400 yards away, I was more able to easily discern differentiation in the branches. I mean, these are very slight differences, but I would give the edge to the Meopta. Both of these are very serviceable and will do you well. One big difference between the two is the reticle. They're both FFP scopes. This is where one of the differences comes in. This Burris is 5 to 25, so they have to design the reticle in a size that it will be useful when you're all the way up at 25. The downside of that is that the reticle begins to get smaller at lower magnifications. I think it's still usable at 10. Depending on the background. It does have illumination, which you can turn on. Once you get below 10, get down towards 8, I would have trouble personally probably using that BDC quickly without having to kind of hunt for it and find it in the scope view, just because the reticle size is different. Now this is only a 3 to 18, so they could take a little bit more liberty with the reticle. However, the reticle size is much easier on the eye to pick up and read at all magnifications. So if you really need to go out, if you need the 25x, the Burris is set up to do that, and the reticle is very useful and usable at various ranges. It gets a little hard to see under 10. The Meopta, I would say that reticle I can use at every range in the magnification, every setting in the magnification range, although it only goes up to 18. For me, that's okay. In the Burris, you see you've got locking wind, locking elevation, which is nice. The Meopta is slightly different in that the elevation is locking. The windage is capped. That's fine for me. I typically will dial for elevation and hold for wind, and there are marks in here to help you do that. Same with the Burris. I don't think there's really an edge on either one of them in that regard. I would mention that the Meopta, the side focus goes all the way down to 10 yards, so if you think you're going to be doing any near shooting, that may be a consideration. The Burris goes down to 25 yards. I don't know how often you'd be shooting at something under 25 yards where you need to get the scope on it and worry about getting your parallax set exactly right. The Burris is lighter, 24 ounces versus 30, so if weight is a big consideration, you might want to think about the Burris. Now the Burris starts off at a 5, and this Meopta starts off at a 3. A benefit of that for hunting applications is field of view on lower magnifications. The best field of view you get on the Burris is 22 feet versus a 10 extra feet. You get 33 feet on the Meopta. A couple other differences. Total travel is 65 MOA in your Burris. It is 90 in the Meopta. And the Burris is doped for the 140 grain ELD match bullet, and the ballistics match up very nicely. I would caution you that if you get the Meopta, in the manual it tells you the ballistics match up to 120 grain load. If you run the ballistic data on that load, it starts to get way off at about 650 yards. However, if you shoot the Federal Fusion 140 grain bullets, the ballistics match up all the way out to 1,000. The holdovers in the Meopta go out to 1,000. In the Burris, they go out to 700. But you do have the exposed turret, locking turret to dial, so that shouldn't be that big of a deal. The turret is slightly bigger on the Meopta by about half an inch, and it just is beefier in general with that rubber knurling. That may be a good thing, that may be a bad thing. It is just totally up to you. With the Meopta, you get this big knurled rubberized magnification ring, and they also include a throw lever, which you can insert into any one of those holes so it doesn't interfere with your bolt action. On the Burris, no throw lever is included. You also get caps included with the Meopta. You do not get the caps included with the Burris. Interesting thing about the illumination, you can see the illumination control is next to the parallax, where it often is on the Burris. The Meopta, now this does come in like more traditional illuminated variants. They use the little, what is it, CR2032, the little coin battery. This particular model, this Creedmoor reticle, has their dichromatic technology, or dichromatic tech, DT, they stamp it on the end. This is pretty cool. This reticle is etched in a manner that it is able to pick up and use various transmitted light waves. So right now when I'm looking at this reticle, it is transparent and it is red with no powered illumination, solely based on the light that the scope is picking up. In lower light, that red color will change, and they have coated it in a way that the color will change to provide the highest possible contrast with the amount of ambient light available. So I think later in the day it'll turn to a greenish, and it does have a red dot in the middle. Pretty cool. You don't have to worry about a battery. It's very cool to have a semi-transparent reticle. I've never had one of those. The trick will be to look through these as we are in dawn or dusk, and then see how much light this dichromatic tech needs to operate, because it doesn't have a battery. So when there is no light for this thing to operate with, you will be seeing a reticle just as you would with no illumination. So that's something to consider. But if you're going to be in far-flung places that are very remote, and you don't want to have to worry about a battery, it's one less piece of technology that can ostensibly break on you, you might want to consider that. And that does mean that the parallax turret on the Burris is a little bit bigger because it has the housing for that lume and the illumination, and the Meopta does not. Optical quality, I would give the slight edge to the Meopta, although this Burris is certainly very serviceable. These are both very good scopes that I think you can take and use out at long ranges. I am willing to sacrifice a little bit of the high end of my magnification to get the 3x instead of the 5x on the low end. So if I'm out on a spot and stalk, or if I'm out going to a deer stand and I have this thing on low, it makes for a faster target acquisition at closer distances. I like them both. I think you'd be well served with either of them. I will tell you, one thing that's important to note is for some customers, country of manufacture for the Burris, made in China. Manufacturer of the Meopta is made in Czechoslovakia, which is kind of cool. They don't claim made in Czechoslovakia because they do import some parts from Asia, and it's difficult to understand where all those source parts come from. However, if the MIC thing bugs you, you're going to want to steer clear of the Burris because it is made in China. They're both well made. They both have lifetime guarantees. Very similar in design, very similar in dimension. The Meopta is a little heavier, but I do think you get slightly superior optical quality with the Meopta. is in the 50 millimeter. I have a similar setup, but a 56 millimeter on my 243, and I think this glass is every bit as good as like Vortex PST Gen 2, at least the VX3 HD. It's just bright. The eye box is super forgiving. The eye box on this Burris is kind of tight, and especially once you start dialing up magnifications, it's hard to get behind that scope and get right on the deal. Eye box is a little more forgiving in the Meopta. Two good choices, just a little bit different. Hard to completely compare apples to apples based on the fact that their magnification settings are a little bit different. The Meopta really feels robust, well made, just feels really solid. So does the Burris overall. The controls don't feel quite as beefy, but you know, the locks all snap. They do what they're supposed to do. They sound good. Everything's tight and right. I'm probably keeping the Meopta, would be my guess. Part of it's because of the Made in China deal. Part of it is the increase, I think, that you get in the optical quality. And I'm kind of jazzed up to try the reticle that does not need batteries. And the reticle is just way more legible and usable at all magnifications. Although that's just a product of the fact that Burris had to make some choices with reticle sizing, given that it is a 5 to 25. You can't have your reticle fill up the whole thing once you go to max magnification. The other thing on the parallax, there is a hash mark on the Burris to tell you where you're at, probably 100 is my guess, and the Meopta is marked in yardage. Not that that is ever perfect, because we all have different eyes, but it is kind of nice to have a number to at least get you to where you think you're supposed to be. They both have diopter adjustments. You know, they're pretty similar in what they're trying to achieve with these, particularly given that they're both set up for the same caliber. I think you'd probably be happy with either one. They're very similarly priced, very similar features. If glass quality is your number one determining factor, I would go with the Meopta. If you have to have illumination that requires a battery, you need to go with the Burris. If your clarity of reticle is important to you, I would go with the Meopta. If close field, near view focusing is the most important thing to you, you got to go with the Meopta. If weight trumps everything, you got to go with the Burris, right? So it really depends when it comes down to comparing these two scopes is, what do you want to use it for? What do you want it to do? What do you need out of it? And then pick the scope that has the feature set that is best suited to meet those objectives, because I think they probably both do the job. That's it from here. Take care. I'll maybe try to do a little bit of work at dusk and then see how these things compare. It's just so difficult to get these things set up and get a picture through the glass that doesn't look terrible so that you guys can see it. You have to take my word for it, or just go down to your local retailer and pick them up and look through them for yourself and make a decision. We'll see you guys. Bye.